Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our first series. I'm Mayor Thompson, and I'd like to welcome you again to the first series of our Land Use Forums, our Speaker and Community Dialogue series of certainly the City of Sugar Land. We're certainly all very proud of our community and also proud that residents such as yourself are willing to come and give an evening in time to learn about our land use and truly help shape the vision and future of the City of Sugar Land. So before we get into a few comments, I'd like to thank several council members who have been truly dedicated through this process. And if I could ask you to stand, special thanks to Councilmember Young, Bridget Young, Councilmember Jay Jew, Harish J. Jew, and Joe Zimmerman. They have been participating in this council task force steering committee and the land use project since the inception, so thank you very much for your dedication, your leadership. So, we also have members representing some of the other city boards tonight. If I could ask you to stand, I know we have members of the P&Z and some other members. If I could ask you to stand up and be recognized, so very much, thank you. So this council chamber's getting a lot of use lately. I had the privilege to spend some time last night watching television and watched the P&Z meeting. I think you guys, got out of here about 12:15 last night, so thank you for what you do. So, additionally, I'd also like to ask any member, we also have a Land Use Advisory Committee. I know we have several members of those folks here. Russell, Chelsea, if I could ask you all to stand. Mary, the Advisory Committee, the Land Use Advisory Committee. They are also citizens that have truly dedicated their time and expertise and, even more important, their energy for our community. So, the Sugar Land residents have established a very robust vision for the future of our community and our comprehensive plan. A safe, beautiful, inclusive, and environmentally responsible community that has great neighborhoods and outstanding cultural, educational, and recreational opportunities, and we're seeing that unfold as we speak. A regional business center of excellence with balanced development and redevelopment in a city in which residents take pride. To be successful at achieving this vision, we must continually incorporate it into our daily operations and ensure all of our planning documents are in alignment. And that's what's so special about our community as we do these visions and planning, and it truly is a guiding document for our day-to-day activities. With that said, and how we use these documents, it is time to update this land use plan. These documents are policies that guide the development within the city. In addition to better aligning it with our vision, we would like to engage the community in considering many of the changing realities identified in the plan that was last updated in 2004, such as shifts in our demographics, our evolving economic development practices, the new mobility patterns which we see changing all the time, and an increased desire among our residents for creative places and even new housing choices. Tonight is the first of a 6-part series on land use. Our goal for the evening is to understand how the demographics are changing in our city and what we need to keep in mind from a land use perspective to continue to be an attractive community in light of these changes. I again thank you all for being here tonight. It is great to have the residents who truly care about our community and the future of Sugar Land, and it is our privilege from a city perspective to host this event tonight. Over the next 3 months, we will be bringing some very qualified and exciting speakers from all around the country to share their experiences so we can learn from best practices. At this point, I would like to turn it over to Christoph Speiler. Chris is with Morris Architects. He has been the city's consultant all along through this project. Chris will be our facilitator for the evening and will be walking us through tonight's agenda and introducing our guest speaker. So at this time, if you would please welcome Christoph to the podium. Christoph, please join us.
So today, as the mayor said, is the first of a 6-part forum series. And the purpose of this series is both to inform the residents of Sugar Land and the policymakers of Sugar Land, and to give city staff a chance to hear from the residents on how to shape the future of the city. So today we're going to be focusing on demographics in the marketplace, but I want to start by giving you a little bit of a roadmap for how tonight will go, and then introduce the series in general. We're going to start with Mitchell Silver, the first of our guest speakers, followed by Stephen Klienberg, the second. After that, we are going to do a Q&A up here. We actually have a multitude of different ways for you to ask questions. One of them is these blue cards, which you should have gotten. Just pass them down and city staff will collect them from you. We are also collecting questions via Twitter and via Facebook. We'll be intercepting those right up here and then passing those on to the speaker. So we'll have that question and answer period. After that, you will break out into individual groups, and we're going to have an activity for you to respond to what you heard tonight. So that's what we're going to do tonight. And now let me introduce the purpose of this entire series. Land use is a very boring word, frankly, for something that's incredibly important. And at first you might think the land use plan is going to be a very dry document. And if you think about what happens in your life, you might not think of it as something that's very important. But if you think about it, land use is really central to everything we do. Land use is what kind of place you work in. Land use is what kind of neighborhood you live in. What is the shape of that neighborhood? What is the form of that neighborhood? What is next to that neighborhood? It's what choices you have to shop. It's where you can have lunch. It's whether your house is close enough to a park that you can walk there. And if you look at the finances of a city, how much you pay in taxes is greatly determined by land use. It's determined by the mix of commercial and residential property, and it's determined by the value of that property, and it's determined by how much it costs the city to maintain the infrastructure that supports those land uses. The future of a city can be predicted based on its land uses. And land use is driven by two things. The first is the private market. It doesn't matter how pretty a picture a planner can draw. If the private market will not finance that, will not build that, it doesn't matter. So ultimately, land use is constrained by the private market. What I will say, though, and I've seen a lot of different places, Sugar Land is lucky enough to be attractive enough a place and desirable enough a place that there are a lot of land use patterns and a lot of kinds of development that will work here. The market wants to develop in Sugar Land. But the second piece is city policy. And the city plays a very profound role in determining land use. We can think through all of these different pieces. There's zoning, there's development regulations, everything from setbacks to a building to how much parking you have to provide. There's master plans for new planned developments. There's utilities, there's transportation, there's public facilities like parks and schools. There's taxes and tax rates. And if the city wants to promote a specific development, the city has the opportunity to incentivize that development to do specific things. So if you think of all of those powers, ultimately the future of land use in the city of Sugar Land will be shaped by the city's plans. And that's why we're here right now, to determine what that plan will be for the next 10 years. So ultimately what we're deciding is what kind of city you and your neighbors will live in. It's a very big deal. These are some pictures from Sugar Land 30 years ago. And you take a look at those empty fields, those a few scattered subdivisions. That's empty land between Sugar Land and Houston right there. Think about how much Sugar Land has changed since then. Think about how much change you've seen in the last 30 years, and now think about how much change you could see in the next 30. We are trying to look forward that far here because the city policies that are adopted now will shape land use for that long. So ultimately, this process is actually about looking ahead, thinking about the future, not what's happening today, but what will happen 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 20 years from now. And what we have to realize is that for a city to be successful, it has to keep attracting new businesses, and it has to keep attracting new people. And so every city is competing. Sugar Land is competing against other cities in this region for companies and for people. And the Houston region is competing against other parts of the United States for companies and for people. And the United States is competing against the rest of the world. And so the question is, what is that market and how is it changing? Is what attracted people 10 years ago what attracts people today and what will attract them 10 years from now? And that's the question we're asking with today's forum. What should Sugar Land be like 25 years from now? So we have a pair of amazing speakers today. We're going to start with Mitchell Silver. He's the immediate past president of the American Planning Association and also the chief planning and development officer for Raleigh, North Carolina, a place that actually has a lot of similarities with Sugar Land. Before that, he was a planning director in New York City and a principal at an architecture firm, a town manager in New Jersey, deputy planning director in Washington, D.C. So he's seen this both from the private consulting side as well as from the government side. He's well known for his visionary plans, a contributing author of an edition of Local Planning, Contemporary Principles and Practice, taught graduate planning courses at places like Hunter University, Brooklyn College, currently a lecturer in housing and urbanization at Harvard, and named one of the 100 top city innovators in the world in 2013. So I'd like you to welcome Mitchell Silver.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me. Certainly a pleasure to be here. Before I start, just one qualification is that I actually met my beautiful wife. Actually, I didn't say I met her here, but my wife is born and bred in Houston, right down the road. Actually, driving down 59 brought back a lot of memories. Still has family there, both in Houston and along the whole I-10 corridor, and also Missouri City. We have some friends here from Missouri City. So I've been in this area many, many times, never in Sugar Land, so it's a pleasure to be with you. The other thing I want to talk about is a little bit about my background. I do a lot of traveling. As president of the association, American Planning Association is an organization of about 40,000 members in 90 countries. So during my 4 years as president, I got to travel to almost every country, 45 states, and I actually traveled to Australia last year. And because it's a very long flight, I actually messed up the timing, and I was supposed to arrive a day early. And in fact, I arrived 3 hours before my presentation after flying for 24 hours. I usually describe my background, and I wanted to say I was mixed race, but because I was traveling so much, I said, "Hi, I'm Mitchell Silver, I'm mixed use." And I looked at the audience, and I said, "Did I say mixed use?" And they said, "Yes." So I am both mixed race and mixed use. I will be talking about demographics, and just to share with you a little bit about my background, I am mixed race. My mother is Haitian and Catholic, and of course immigrated here at a very young age. My father is white and Jewish and migrated here from Germany. So if you put a black Haitian Catholic and a white German Jew together, what you get is a mixed race born-again Christian who gets along with himself totally well. The New Testament side gets along with the Old Testament side. There's no inner turmoil whatsoever. In fact, when I was growing up, being born mixed race, they call you all sorts of things. You know, half-breed, zebra, mutt, etc. But it wasn't until the 1990s when they finally came up with a new term for mixed race. Thank you, Alicia Keys and Halle Berry. And they now call it exotic. So I am here as your exotic speaker tonight. We're going to talk about a very serious subject tonight. I first wrote about some of this information in a book back in 2006 and really stumbled upon the change in demographics and how it will affect how we plan for our community and our country really going forward. For some of you, the information you're going to see is going to shock you. It's going to make you uncomfortable. You're not going to like it. But my job is to get you to think as you ponder how you plan for your community. And it's up to you to decide what you're going to do. It is my job to share you some of the information. And when you hear some of this tonight, as you start listening to the radio, you'll start to connect the dots. Because a lot of people kind of thought it was happening, but now when you see this presentation, you'll understand. I've been doing this presentation, probably versions of it, probably about 200 times over the past, I'd say, 40 years. And so I've made various versions. It's been checked through the sources, so I just want to make sure you understand. And I have a little bit of information for Sugar Land, so at least it'll be relevant to you. So let's get into the presentation. The first is I always like to talk about change in this country, because a lot of people don't like change. They don't like growth. And I say if you don't like growth, you might as well say you don't want it to rain. It's inevitable. If you look at what happened in our country back in the 19th century, our population in the U.S. was a mere 5 million people. Urbanized population, 6%. By the 20th century, our population swelled to 76 million, primarily from people migrating here from Europe, and our urbanized population was 40%. You can see what happened in the 21st century. We continued to grow, almost 300 million. And by the 22nd century, our country is projected to be over 500 million people. And I want to pause for a second. When people see the 22nd century, they go, oh, that is so far off. Not really. A person born today can live to see the 22nd century. In fact, they say 1 out of 3 children born today will live to see the 22nd century. So decisions that we're making today will affect people who are born today well into the future. Now, where's that growth going to occur, at least over the next 30 years? The West is no longer the destination of choice. It's now the South. People are moving from the Midwest and the North, and they're moving here. You know it, you see it, you're one of the top regions for growth. And that's where it's going to happen. So we try to help people understand how to accommodate the growth, not say no to growth, because it's coming. And the question is how we're going to manage it. But this is a challenge for our country. Over the next 50 years, we have to accommodate 124 million new people in our country. We have to figure out where we're going to place and build 50 million new housing units in our country. And my question to you, because that's a reality, that's not negotiable. That's going to happen unless there's some catastrophic plague that's going to hit us. This is where we're headed. And the question is, if we're going to grow like that, what will the next generation of communities look like? The 1950s? The 1970s? Or something very different? What would Sugar Land or the Houston Metro look like? That's the conversation you're having as you're discussing your land use plan. And if you look at some of the fastest growing metropolitan areas over the past 10 years and projected to continue going forward, we're number 2 on the list, you're number 8. So you're on the top 10. And even though Houston is going to have the greater proportion of that, there will be some spillover. There will be impacts to you because there'll be increased traffic and people and all the things associated with it. So you're going to be basically in the bullseye of the growth going forward. You know that, and I know that. Now, I always like to reflect back because does anybody know what was the top city that shrunk the most since 1950? I'll take some guesses. Detroit. How many people say Detroit? Wrong. I love doing this.
St. Louis? Pittsburgh. St. Louis?
He got it. St. Louis. I should have brought a prize. No one ever got that before. It's St. Louis.
Grew up there.
Oh, okay. How you grew up there? Because people complain about growing. Listen to me carefully. I'd rather grow than shrink. Here's a list of some of the cities that have really took a gut punch. Pittsburgh lost over 1 million manufacturing jobs in 3 years. Yet they're on their way back. I put a highlight of the 2 cities that are on their way back, Cleveland and Pittsburgh. You'd rather be growing than shrinking, and those are only 2 of those cities that are on their way back. So that's a choice you have. You certainly want to make sure that you either are not growing, you either have flat growth, where you're stable, or you have positive growth. So in our region, we're fast growing. Over the next 20 years, we expect to grow by 1.2 million people, 700,000 jobs. And I want to show you what that looks like because this is our region back in the 1950s when, right before RTP arrived, the Research Triangle Park. There's Raleigh, there's Durham. They're not the same. A lot of people call us Raleigh-Durham, 2 different places. There's a Research Triangle Park in the middle. And by 1950, that's what our region looked like, the urbanized area. By 1970, now the Research Triangle Park is in place. People moving from the north, they're moving all over. and you see those places begin to urbanize. Then we had the big growth spurt of the 1980s to 2000, and that's now the sprawl you start seeing in our region as our communities start to grow. And we did a projection. If we continue this pattern of development, what would our community look like, our region, by 2035? And it would look like that. Density just spread across the region, infrastructure we probably couldn't even afford to maintain, and cost us billions and billions of dollars. The reason why I show that to you is because your region looks exactly the same. Same pattern, same issue, same challenges we're facing. To give you an example is our growth. During that period, our population grew by 480%, but we consumed 3.5 times the land to accommodate that growth. And it's not sustainable. So in our region, we said we had to get together and do something different because we could not afford that growth pattern. We would go broke just trying to build and maintain the infrastructure. It's important that you work as a region. I know the context of this conversation is Sugarland, but you don't live on an island. You live connected to a region. And you're hooked up to Houston's wagon, whether you like it or not. And to look at the major metros, and believe me, you're fortunate to be on the list because a lot of metros aren't on this list. There you are. This is ULI's list of the major regional hubs. Houston's on there as an international hub. Our region's on there as creative and nimble. And I love the category of the comeback kids. These are the cities that kind of bottomed out, but they're on their way back. It's important to work as a metro. Here are the emerging metropolitan regions in the country. This will drive our economy in this country in the 21st century. Most of the gross domestic product in this country are coming out of those regions. So it's important that you understand your position and how you have to work together as a region. There you are, the Texas Triangle. Because you rise as a region and you fall as a region. If Houston starts to suffer economically, you will suffer along. And I'm sure I believe that happened back in the 1980s. And we have to learn how to grow together, urban, suburban, and rural. Too often this country is urban against rural. We have to make sure we work together. And the office park is now a dying model in the 21st century, and you'll see why because of some of the demographics. So here's a capture of your land use topics. Your consultants and staff are doing a good job because these are probably the topics I would pick. So you're on target, and you're off to a great start. But from my perspective, let me share with you, based on some comments that I've observed, you are an affluent community, there's no question about it. But some want more affordable housing. You're very diverse. In fact, I was surprised how diverse you were, but I've noticed you had one of the highest Asian populations I've seen. And again, I've done this all over the country. There are 2 other places I've seen that had numbers as high as you, and one is in Morrisville, right where I live in the Triangle. You want more jobs, but you're a bedroom community to Houston. You want lower taxes, but your development patterns make that a challenge because you're building a lot of infrastructure that's using a low land assessed value that you have to pay for. We'll get to that a little bit later. You want more places to go and things to do. You want redevelopment, but centers and corridors are aging out, and there seems to be that some are allergic, which we'll talk about, afraid, fearful, don't know what to do with multifamily and apartments. We'll get to that too. You're a young city. You're incorporated in 1959. So it's no surprise that 99% of your housing stock was built after 1960. So in terms of your history and authenticity, it's basically relatively new. And then a lot of comments I heard people say you want Sugarland to lead. I'd love to understand what that means. So this is what I figured out. People in Sugarland seem to want change so long as it doesn't change anything. That's my takeaway. Okay? So people in Sugarland seem to want to change so long as it doesn't change anything. Does that sound right? Okay. We got work to do. So, there's this phrase, because we're dealing with this whole issue about leadership in our region, because we're trying to pass Get Light Rail. And so here was a simple headline in the news, well, local paper, in the editorial, because they were frustrated that our county commission won't allow us to vote on this half-cent sales tax. They had a simple phrase: to lead, by definition, is to plan ahead. I love that phrase. To lead, by definition, is to plan ahead. But I like to reverse things. That means, therefore, to not plan ahead means that you're not leading. So I want to commend all of you, both the elected officials, the mayor, and the advisory committee and staff, that you took that bold move of planning for the future. A lot of places don't do that. Places that plan that are better off than places that don't. So I have to commend you for really focusing on planning for the future. What is the role of planning? Just want to make sure we're on the same page. It's really to manage growth and change, deal with uncertainty about the future, and it plans for both present and future generations. A lot of people like to say that last phrase, but they like to focus on themselves and the present generation, not future. Planning is about both. And we're going to test that in a second so you'll know what I'm talking about. We're also supposed to protect the public interest, public health, safety, and welfare. Planners are supposed to have a special concern for the long-term consequences of present actions. When my council and plan commission has a proposal, it is my job, although I'm sweating at times, to tell them, I understand your proposal, but this is the consequences for this action. So you don't understand. We're the elected body, and I say, I understand, but I have an ethical obligation to tell you here are some of the consequences for that decision. You can make the decision, but I have to share with you the consequences. And it's tough. But what concerns me more is not that issue. It's the consequences of taking no action, of putting your head in the sand and saying, I don't believe the data, I don't believe what you're saying, because saying no is an action. You can say no, but there are consequences for saying no. In our community, they said no to density. They didn't want it. Multifamily, we didn't want it. We says, well, the consequence is you have to be prepared to tell young people and seniors, we don't want you in our community. Are you prepared to tell them that? Because that was the dilemma that we were dealing with in our community. And so when you say no to something, you're saying yes to something else. What are you saying yes to? Just saying no isn't enough. You're saying yes to something else. And that's a conversation you need to have here in Sugar Land as you go through the land use process. So this slide is something that I've shared many times. It's the emerging trends and challenges that we will face in the 21st century. A couple of things about this slide. Some of the items on this list has never happened before. It's brand new to the 21st century. So you can't Google to find the solutions for these problems. You can't. You can't rewind because there aren't any examples. The browning of America, the graying of America, what we call the silver tsunami, and they didn't name it after me. This has never happened to America before. The aging of our population. It's global. In fact, Japan, if you don't know this, they're now selling more adult diapers than children's diapers in Japan. The whole planet is aging. And no one knows exactly how we're going to deal with it. And I can go on and on. We're not going to touch on all of these. But you will see the land use implications to some of these demographic changes and how they're going to affect us. But these are game changers for our country. This is game changers for our planet. And some of these are game changers for your community. So I believe planners and us in the business, we have to understand emerging trends like stockbrokers watch the market. That's what I do with my staff. We constantly monitor these trends so we can inform you what to prepare for. And I know you're doing that because this first forum is about demographic change. Because important, you don't just vision, but you frame how you want to deal with these problems. What problems are you solving? Not just visioning for the future, what are you solving? So you can all be in agreement that you can plan ahead. So here's the new reality, and I'll get into this now. There'll be more older Americans living longer, more diversity, more people with disabilities. I'm going to go over these items in great detail, but this is the new reality. And these are national trends, but you'll see how some of these affect you because we have an expert to talk about it. But this is going to change the way we plan our communities going forward. And you can say no. You can listen, and then after I leave, go and do another direction, but just recognize there are consequences for those decisions, and if you can live with it, I'm totally fine. Let's go with aging in households first. These are national numbers. By 2030, 1 in 5 Americans will be over the age of 65. This has never happened before in our country. Brand new problem. 1 in 5 Americans have a disability today. That number is going to grow for a variety of reasons. But not only will there be more Americans over the age of 65, but they'll be living longer. By 2050, the number of Americans over the age of 85 is going to triple to close to 20 million Americans because of advances in science and people living healthier. But the game changer, in my opinion, is by 2025, the predominant household in the U.S. is going to be one person. Not a family, a husband and wife with kids, one person, a single or a widower. That will be the predominant household from 2025 and going forward. And it's hard for people to digest that. But that is our reality. And you'll see every year you keep hearing the birth rate dropping and dropping and dropping, and the aging population who can no longer have children, growing and growing. It is happening not just to us, but around the world. There's also this phenomenon called a natural decrease. 25% of all U.S. counties are fading away. Common denominator, older whites who can no longer have children, and their children are saying, I'm not staying here. I don't like the lifestyle. I don't like the job prospects. I'm going to go to Dallas or Austin or Raleigh. I'm not staying here. And if you want to know what it looks like in Texas, if it's beige, those are your shrinking counties in Texas. You know those areas quite well. You know the ones that are shrinking. Now, luckily, the areas that are growing tremendously. But the areas you do have shrinking counties, even though you're a state that has basically the largest population. But here's West Virginia. This state is the worst in the country in terms of shrinking counties. The only reason why that dark corner is that color is because that's now where people commute in West Virginia to Washington, D.C. Now, the one I'm going to show you next is not the worst, but visually it is. And ladies and gentlemen, let's take a look at Kansas. And if you go to Kansas and you talk about planning, can you please leave? We don't want that regulation. No. The state that probably needs more planning and intervention than any other state, they're in a free fall. And there's battles going on between Kansas City, Kansas and Kansas City, Missouri, because it's the only game in town. So this is why we have to pay attention to those demographics. Let's look at families. Look at the shocking change in unwed births. Back in the 1960s, you know, some of you in the room, it was unheard of. You could not do this. You had to send a woman away. Back then, 5 out of 100 children born under wedlock. Today, 4 out of 10. 4 out of 10. It's not just blacks, it's Hispanics, it's whites, it's across the board. In fact, more than half of the mothers today under 30 are single. Today. That means it's a generation that we're going to have to plan for housing, for schools, for services, for parks. That's going to be with us for a generation. Look at the age, under 30. Now, I like to use a slide, and when I go to college campuses, very often, I'll see this young man trying to talk to this young lady throughout my presentation. And I'll say, young lady, he's not serious. How do I know? This chart tells me so. For whatever reason, the age, that sweet spot where people got married from 25 and 34, back in the 1960s, it was at 85%. Now it's down to 50%. So people said, don't worry about the suburbs. They're going to get married and have kids. Really? Well, only half are getting married. And when a woman does decide to have a child, she said, that's okay. For whatever reason, I'm going to raise a child on my own. That is a new reality. For whatever reason, you can hold a focus group and find out what's going on. I'm sure Sugar Land is more family-oriented, so it may be a little bit different. But these trends are headed your way. So here's one chart you can look at a glance just to show the dramatic change from 1960 to 2025. And if you look at the big change where households with children will drop to 28%. Any developers in the room? None? Okay, pretend to be developers. If you were a developer, what kind of housing would you be building if you look at 2025? Tell me. Single family? You can. If I'm in a business, this is the challenge that it's up to you. But this is where we're headed. And these are numbers from the U.S. Census Bureau and other experts. So what are the implications? Number one, what in the world are we going to do when people realize when they get to a certain age they can no longer drive and all they need is a car for mobility? In fact, the number right now is 70, on average, 600,000 Americans over 70 stop driving or can't drive every year. Now, the good news for you, there's something called autonomous vehicles. Pay attention to it because that may be an answer. But in the meantime, this is going to be a challenge, and we're looking at how people be isolated and have to rely on others. Because we've asked people, they say, oh, I was going to rely on my friend. My friend said, wait a minute, I was going to rely on her to drive me around. And they realize that we are in a situation where we're going to have others figure out how we're going to drive around. There it is. Metro Atlanta, the worst in the country. In just 2 years. Actually, I have to change it. Now it's 1 year. 90% of seniors in Metro Atlanta have poor transit access. 90%. Guess what? You can't plan that problem in a year. You can't get out of it. They're trying, but you can't. Raleigh-Durham, my region, we're number 5 on the list of mid-sized metros. But here's the good news. We caught the trend early, and we have a plan in place to deal with it. We saw the demographics, and we have a plan for it. And you need to look at this one as well, because if you have a growing, aging population, this will be an issue you'll have to deal with. Other implications, seniors and younger generation, they'll demand different lifestyle options for housing, for transportation, and for entertainment. It's different. You have to plan for it, and it affects your land use. There's a preference for smaller homes, and there's a preference to rent rather than own. Either they can't afford to buy or they don't want to. You see preferences changing. And the one that's scaring everybody is experts estimate there'll be 25 million single-family homes on the market with nobody to buy them because there'll be a disconnect between a buyer, a single person, and the product, a house built for a family of 5. And that is one that we're all trying to figure out, how do we change that housing stock building so we can absorb it going forward. Now, I know people want to jump in their phone and say, honey, it's time to sell, sell, sell. Don't worry. You have till the 2020s, but this is something you have to keep an eye on. About as you build the next wave of housing supply, you don't want to build Polaroid cameras when you know people are looking for digital cameras. There's something you have to keep an eye on. So here's an example in our market. That's Cameron Village, the shopping center. We decided to put more density around our shopping centers. There's some of the examples, and people are still upset at me. That's under construction. Market rate, very expensive. People are upset at me. I can't see the sun. It's a canyon. What do you do? Because they thought when people rent, renters aren't real Americans. Like, how many people ever rented in their life? Please, or someone you know. I mean, should I leave the room? You're all nice people. But when someone else rents, our minds go to another place. We had to deal with that issue in Raleigh, and now those projects right there are going up, and that's what the final product's looking like. 270 apartments. They took applications. You know how many they got? 6,400. So guess what? They're building more apartments. The first time in our city, 70% of all residential units built were multifamily, and only less than 20% were single family. The market's changing because young people, empty nesters, want high quality, near amenities that they can walk to. The market's changing. So I took a look at your occupied housing. I have never seen a single family number that high before. 91% Sugar Land. That's high. I compared you to Houston at 53 and Raleigh at 60. The number is high. I think you already know that. Primarily a single family. So you need to pay attention to these changing demographics because you have some decisions to make. A good number is to be a 55-45 split like Houston and Raleigh. You don't have to. I'm just saying if you want to provide diversity of housing stock, having 55-45 owner-renter split is good. You're at 84-16. So it's your decision going forward what it is that you want to do. Other implications, this is a tough one. The older people get, the more NIMBY they become. Isn't that exciting? Because the older people get, they do not want change. No, no, no. And that's a challenge that we have to deal with. I'll skip the other two for the sake of time. I will not spend too much time on this one, although just to share with you, by 2043, there'll no longer be a majority race in the U.S. It was 2042, it now changed to 2043. And this is, as you can see, by 2050, that's what America is going to look like. A lot of people are worried about this. They don't know what it means. And so, PolicyLink, and this is just some of the numbers, you see the Hispanic population will triple. You'll see by 2023, more than half of U.S. children will be minority, and by 2050, they'll be 62%. People saying, what's going on? What do we do? Now, a lot of stuff in this country that's happening is driven by the fear of what this means. So I'm going to show you from 1980 to 2040, what the country will look like. The darkest the color is the highest concentration of people of color. The lightest the color is less than 30%. This is what the country looked like in 1980. Of course, you can keep an eye on Texas. This is 1990. This is 2000. This is 2010, 2020, 2030, and then 2040. Now, when I show this to my residents in Raleigh, they're like, oh my goodness. Why? I said, guess what? It's already happened. And guess what? We're a great place. There's no shooting in the street, and people aren't being robbed. We have great schools, great community, great place, great education. But when people think what this means, it terrifies them. And guess what? It happened to you too, Sugar Land. I'm sorry, I spelled your name wrong. I apologize. It's 2 words. It happened. And guess what? You're a great community. So when you imagine those numbers and when you see it in reality, and like I said, I've not seen a number that high. Oops. Oh my goodness, I really messed up. Amanda's here to take care of us. She'll be with it in a second. Will it pop back right where we were, or we go back to the beginning?
We'll go back to the beginning, but that's okay.
Okay.
Skip the beginning back.
Yes. Oh, you have to go that way? Go, 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 go. Anybody can sing here? Who's a good singer? Keep going, keep going.
Oh,
Keep going. Keep going, going, going. Oh, keep getting close. Get closer. Keep going, keep going, keep going. We're about 2/3 done, everybody, so just so you know where we are. Okay, that's this right after 2040. Okay. Yes. So just to let you know, I have to congratulate you because you went through that map and you're doing fine. You're a great community, and you take a deep breath, just let it all out, everything's fine. But people are still worried about that. And so it happened in Raleigh in 2010. That was a headline in our newspaper. Personally, I wish they used another headline than Whites Outnumbered. You know, I mean, but that's, they could have used another title. But it happened to us, and we're a great community. And this is going to happen more and more with these changing demographics, and I have to commend you because you already handle it quite well. Now we're going to have a little bit of fun because this is going to really help you to understand your community. When we plan for communities, we look at the market, just like a business person does. Each one of those markets have different behaviors. And I know everybody on this room is on this list. If you're not, you're dead. So I know everybody here is on this list. And I'm going to go through this. Why am I going to go through this? Because each one of those generations have different values, needs, and aspirations. You don't look at your community the same because it drives consumer preferences and market demand for homes, for retail, for your community. And you're going to find something about yourself tonight by going through this presentation. And you're going to understand a lot more about how you feel the way you feel and think the way you think. Now, I'm going to generalize, so don't take this personally. So let's first go with the greatest generation. There's a picture of my father when he went to World War II, and another picture right before he passed away about a year ago. But my father, the greatest generation. There's about 2%, less than 2% of them left in our country. My father, he experienced the Great Depression, not Great Recession, the Great Depression. Fought through World War II. Different world back then. My father wouldn't buy anything. He'd go to a garage sale and fix it up rather than just spend money. Credit card, he would use it, pay the bill. Did not believe in debt. They understood the value of savings, and he just did not want to be in debt. But the one thing that defined my father's generation, different than any other generation, is that they truly gave the ultimate sacrifice because they gave their today for our tomorrow. And we have never seen a generation like that since. That's why they're called the greatest generation. So if you see them anywhere, give them a hug and thank them because there's less than 2% of them left in our country. That is a special, cherished generation. They're 90 and above today. Then we get to the silent, mature, Eisenhower, post-war. This generation have lots of names. This generation grew up during the urbanization of America, when people left downtown to get a piece of earth that they could defend. This was the highways, the single-family home. This generation sees the world, and I don't blame them. Traditional family values, hardworking, you have a piece of earth that you can defend, traditional values. They too understood the values of savings before they spent. So this generation, although many are enlightened, have a difficult time with urban. I don't get it. And so when their child says, Mom, Dad, I want to live downtown, are you sure? Is it safe? You only go downtown to see someone in prison or pay a bill. You don't live downtown. See a movie, but don't live there. But a lot of them are changing their minds because they see the value. So when I work with elected officials, I think this way. I don't blame them because that's their orientation. That is America. That is a neighborhood. It is low density. It is suburban. It is trees. It's driving. It's freedom. And we have to understand that and not get upset. But this is what our challenges that we have to face. Then we get to the coolest generation, clearly on the face of the planet. You know them. They are the baby boomers. We are immortal. We believe we will never get old. I don't know where we get that from. But what's interesting about this generation is that where previous generations, like my father, gave up their today for our tomorrow, we spent a lot of money and borrowed and borrowed and borrowed. We were busy. We bought our kids whatever they wanted on borrowed money. And now it's a reality check, and we contributed to this great recession. And so my father's generation gave our today, but their tomorrow. But the boomer generation, sorry, I'm a boomer too. I'm looking for a young person. You look young enough, Chelsea. We gave your tomorrow for our today. My father was different. His generation was different. And that's the reality check that we're all dealing with. Now, I turned 50 a couple of years ago. I know I look somewhat good for my age. But someone sent me this list, thought it was going to be funny. So any of you who are over 50 or near 50, I have something very exciting for you to look for. The first one is, people call you at 9 p.m. and ask, did I wake you? Check. Wow. In a hostage situation, you're likely to read the list first, so you can now travel abroad. Things you buy won't wear out. You can now eat dinner at 4 p.m. And my favorite is, your secrets are safe with your friends because they can't remember it either. Then we get to the bust generation. We had the boom, now the bust. I have to go quickly. I'm looking at my time. I'm a little bit behind schedule. Bottom line, we now have a big change. For the first time, we now see non-traditional families emerging. Women go back to the workforce, divorce rates start to rise, and now we have these complex informal families, step-brother, step-sister, step-dog, step-cat. All of a sudden, these strange, unusual families and traditions are changing. And a lot of Gen Xers don't have a lot of brothers and sisters, don't have a lot of siblings. They don't. And I think because they played by themselves and their imaginary friends, that they are what Richard Florida calls the cutting edge of the creative class. That's you, Gen Xers. So all that time playing by yourselves has paid off. But you're very different. Then we get to, all I can say is, oh my goodness, you know Gen Y, because they want to be CEO of a company after 1 year on the job. That's about all it takes. They're millennials, hipsters, echo boomers. This is generation is going to have, I'm going to have a little bit of fun here, but this is a generation that wants choice. What do I mean by choice? When I grew up, I asked my mom what was breakfast. She told me pancakes. I watched my wife every single Saturday. Honey, tells my daughter what's for breakfast. My wife says we have bagels, toast, eggs, cereal, on and on. When I grew up, I had two choices. I ate or I didn't eat. My daughter has a full menu. You know what I'm talking about. Some of you do the same thing. And guess what? They now don't want choice, they demand choice. They're trophy kids. Everybody wins, nobody loses. If you came in last, that's okay, because you showed up. God. How many people have millennials in their house? Just so I could just do a check here. A few of you? All right. Or they work for you? You know. But I make a lot of fun of them. Let me just say something very serious about this generation. You want them in your community. We have never seen a more purpose-filled generation than this generation. 80% of them volunteer on one condition. It's got to have a purpose. No purpose, they walk. So all those trends I'm sharing with you, all this change that's coming, God sent the most purpose-filled generation we've seen in a long time to help us work through these problems. Because some of us will not live to see some of these changes, but they will. So I encourage you to help them because they think differently. They're more culturally and racially tolerant than previous generations. They're environmentally conscious. They prefer a different lifestyle. Place matters, not job. They will actually move to a city without having a job. Who does that? This generation. I don't care. I love the city. I'm just moving. Anybody know what I'm talking about? I mean, people come to Raleigh. Hi, I don't have a job. I just love the city. But this is what we're dealing with. So you have to make sure Sugar Land is appealing to keep them. I won't talk much about Gen X, Gen Z. A lot of similarities. They're now in high school and younger. A lot of similarities. They're also hipsters, by the way, of Gen Z. But they're another generation that's on their heels. So the point that I'm making is that the battle we're having in our country is not with left or right. It's about our values, generational values. And that's what we'll be dealing with in our country. Because our generation values, we're consumers of goods. But the younger generations are consumers of experiences. That's what they're looking for in a community. And if you don't provide those experiences, they'll go where it is. And that's one of the challenges. So there's going to be tension in our country over the next 10 years as there's a battle between the different generational values. regardless of your political affiliation. That's what we're dealing with in our country, and it'll go on going forward. It'll play itself out. So it's not about what's next, but it's also about who's next. So I did a little bit of analysis on your demographic profile based on these generations. Sugar Land, I'm a little bit shocked. These are some low numbers. So Austin, Raleigh's almost the same as Austin. We're at 71%. What we're showing is the percentages of the generational groups in your community. Austin, as you can see, between the X, Y, and Z generation, that's 47 and below, 71%. Sugar Land, 54%. You're a pretty mature community in terms of age. I think you know that. It's a high number. Why do I show you this chart? Because I like to look at that number, whether it's 71% or 54%. Here's the challenge, Sugar Land. Can the older generation give up their tomorrow for that 54%? I mean, can they give up their today for that 54% tomorrow? And most places I go to, the answer is no. I want you to live the way I think you should live because that's what I know. That's how I grew up. That's what I want. But they're going to be around for another 50, 60, 70 years. How do you have this conversation about land use knowing full well that here are some of the numbers? In Raleigh, we're 71%. The council said, we're going to listen to that 71%, the majority of our residents, we're going to listen. And we started to see things change in our community because we did not want them to leave. So we tried to engage them very differently. You're doing that right now. Older generation come to meetings. They kept saying, no, no, no. We did outreach, and for the first time, we heard yes, yes, yes. And now council said, wait a minute, we have a very different conversation. Because before, the older generation said, we don't want change, no density, no, no. We brought the young people out, the conversation began to change, and we're still considered one of the top-rated communities, even though we have all these apartments and multifamily, high-end, mixed use, coming into our community. I got to go through this really quickly because now I have to do 10 slides in 30 seconds. Here we go. We looked at our trends, realized we were going to grow significantly by 20 years, but we only had about 20,000 acres. We knew we could no longer do it with just single family. We had to change. We did our land use capacity. We knew we were going to grow. We looked at how much land we had left, and we said we can't do it just single family. Something had to change. What did we do? I'll skip this one for the time being. We came up with a growth framework. We looked to concentrate density around shopping centers and corridors and stay away from single-family neighborhoods. And we wanted to go more dense and show, and for the first time, provide places with transit where seniors and young people could live. And guess what? Exactly what's on that map is exactly what's happening. We're now beginning to urbanize at key locations connected by transit. Seniors now have options for transportation. They can live in our community. Number one for seniors is to age in place. We now have an opportunity for them to do that. We then changed our development codes to make sure we can do that type of development. We came up with these various housing types because you could do townhomes to be urban. You can do other product types. We did that. We made sure we were thinking about the seniors, and we had opportunities for lifelong communities and aging in place. Very important to us. We came up with what we called a cottage court. 2 lots combined, small units. Could be for a single, could be for a senior. In walking distance of services. The market loves this. They're building it. Nice product. You can get density without going vertical. You don't have to have apartments going tall. Here's a dense product that could be just as attractive, and there's an example of a cottage court. This is now being developed. Could be a condo, could be an apartment. We also tried, which were unsuccessful, accessory dwellings in the rear yard. Didn't go over very well, but we tried. We wanted to provide, that's a unit in Virginia, that's what it looks like, where you can have a unit in your backyard for your husband, for your gets on your nerves. Oh, I guess it rang a bell. Your boomerang child, your aging parent, or to rent it out. But it failed because when people were opposed to something, they got very creative. It told us it's going to be for sex labs, and did you see Walking Dead? That's what it's, not Walking Dead, Breaking Bad. They said, did you see Breaking Bad? It's going to be a meth lab. I was like, oh my goodness. All right, as I conclude, this is the part I really want to leave you with, is thinking about the marketplace and the land use side. I love this phrase from Mayor Chattanooga: if you want to be a city where people want to live, you want to be a city where people want to invest. Your land use, you've got to look very differently. It's a finite resource. You can't grow it unless you can annex it. You cannot make more land. It has a value. You have to think of land in your community as a commodity. And what you put on it will change its value because your property tax and sales tax comes from land. And you can start doing deal making or plan making, and I'm going to share with you how we started doing more plan making as we used our land use. So what happened? In our community, we'd show them, because I was getting so tired, all you do is develop downtown, downtown, downtown. True, but here's why. It would take 600 homes on 150 acres to equal the tax value of one of our high-rises downtown. 150 acres or 1 acre, same tax value. So I told them, if you do not support downtown development, what you're really saying is, raise my taxes, I'll pay the tax load. I'll do it. As a homeowner, I'll pay the tax load. Is that what you want? Because that building is 90 times the tax value of that suburban acre. And so I said, I never saw it that way. Well, let's go a little bit deeper. A downtown high-rise on a 3-acre site would pay off its infrastructure in 3 years. Return on investment, 35%. Suburban product on a 30-acre site would take 42 years to pay off its infrastructure. Return on investment, 2%. But time after time, even though we show people this one, they'll vote for the bottom, not even knowing how they're putting their community in debt for years to come. Just don't see it. We don't share this with elected officials either. We're beginning to, but we haven't. People say, well, Walmart provides jobs. It does. Let's compare Walmart to, forget a high-rise, just a 5-story building in downtown Asheville. Walmart, 34 acres. That downtown building sits on a ½ acre. Real estate taxes from Walmart on a per-acre basis, $6,500. That little downtown building, 10 times the amount. What about jobs on a per-acre basis? Walmart, 6. That building, downtown, 74. Same acre, different land use. You're looking at your commodity very differently. So in Raleigh, we said, look, let's look at our land. Look at our tax value to see what's happening. And so I wanted to find out where was the highest tax value, how are we doing? I couldn't see it. I asked my staff, can you please put it in 3 dimensions? They did. Can somebody tell me where downtown is? And Midtown. The strength of those commercial cores are helping to support our city and keeping taxes low and stable. So we don't have to cut services. We just make sure we put the right development in the right places, and that is how we're able to balance our city and keep our taxes low. Not doing it by annexing and growing outward. We find the right places and grow upward and make sure it's quality, and you'll see the value of the land. We're about to do a light rail system. I had to communicate to those who were opposed to light rail. If we did light rail, that's what it would do. Increase our tax base as well. All that value will help subsidize to keep the taxes low throughout our city. And so we're looking at, I'm going to skip through this for the sake of time. I do want to end on creative placemaking. We now understand what we're doing. We use this formula of the return on investment to create these great places in our city. Experience of place, memory of place, sense of place, authenticity. We're actually doing it in a number of places because now we understand the return on investment principle, and the developers are coming to the table because now they understand it works. Bottom line, we're one of the lowest tax places in North Carolina because we're smart, we use land efficiently, and we put it in the right place. So we make sure we protect the single-family neighborhoods and put density where it makes sense. So as I close, who will address these emerging issues? What are the key challenges you're facing, and what problems are you trying to solve? You're going to go through that through your land use exercise, and I'm guessing tonight. Can you give your today for the next generations tomorrow? That's going to be a hard question for all of you to confront. It's going to affect how you plan land going to the future. Remember, there are consequences for present actions, but there's also consequences for taking no action. Are you ready for the new reality? And remember, America's changing. Smart places understand their sense of urgency 10 years before it's urgent. And I've been spending some time with you. You all are all very smart. Thank you very much. 6 minutes over.
So we've started today with a national perspective, and now we're going to take the same perspective and zoom in on the Houston region. Stephen Klienberg is a professor of sociology at Rice, and in 1982 he did something very interesting, which is he got a bunch of his students together and asked a lot of Houstonians, a lot of people across the Houston region, questions about their city and their region and what they thought about it. And in the years following that, he did something extraordinary, which is he kept asking the same questions. And the Houston Area Survey is the most comprehensive set of information that any metropolitan area in the United States has about how attitudes about the region have changed over time. So we're talking today about change in demographics, we're talking about change in attitudes, and Stephen Klienberg has actually managed to capture that over time and see where we're going. So, Stephen Klienberg.
And this controls the, okay, well, thank you all so much. Great to be here. When I was asked to come, I said, don't ask me now. Ask me in 4 months, because we're about to launch the 33rd annual Houston Area Survey that has now been reaching a random sample of everybody in the 10-county area. And in this survey this year, we're going to do an oversample that will reach over 500 residents of Fort Bend County. So I will know by May or so of this year much more than I know now about where Fort Bend is, how it differs from Harris County and from other parts of the region, in what is an extraordinarily interesting place. We've been watching, as Christoph said, we've been watching the city develop over 33 years. We did that one-time survey. It never occurred to us to do it again. Actually, back in 1982, Houston was booming. 1 million people had moved here between 1970 and 1982. 1,380 people a week coming into the Harris County area. The greatest boom anyone had ever seen, brought about by the tenfold increase in the value of oil. This was a one-company town. 82% of the primary jobs in the city were tied into the oil business, and the price of a barrel of oil increased tenfold during the 1970s, and we were booming. And we did this one-time survey, and then 2 months later, the oil boom collapsed. We said, oh my God, we better do the survey again. And the great themes that have emerged over these 32 years is that Houston went into major recession and then recovered into a radically different kind of economy, a place where suddenly quality of life issues that were never important. Who cares if it smells? It's a smell of money. Come on down. Quality of life issues, as Mitchell was telling us, is now more a critical part of the success of cities in the 21st century. And then, of course, this truly remarkable demographic revolution. The future of America is here in Houston now, and it's an enormously interesting and challenging opportunity for all of us as we build that this is where, to a very large degree, the American future is going to be worked out. So I want to show that as quickly as I can. So the new economy, this is the 30 years after World War II. The rising tide lifted all boats. We emerged out of that war, the sole economic power on the planet. All of our potential competitors in the global economy were decimated by the war experience. 38% of the jobs in America were union jobs. In the 50s and 60s, the unions could negotiate with the corporations to ensure that individual workers shared in the prosperity of the companies. And the average American man doubled his income in the 30 years between 1946 and 1980. The poorest 20% of Americans more than doubled their incomes during that period. The richest 5% doubled theirs. This was a rising tide lifting all boats. This is the last 30 years, when virtually all the benefits of economic growth have gone to the richest 5%, most of that to the richest 1%, in a striking redistribution of earnings out of the hands of the poor and the middle class into the hands of the rich and the super rich, in a way that we last saw in America in 1928, just before the total collapse of the American economy with the Great Depression. Why is it happening? Globalization. If you're doing a job that I can train a third world worker to do, and I pay that third world worker $10 a day to do that job, I'm not going to pay you $10 an hour. We're in a world where companies can produce goods anywhere, sell them everywhere. If you're doing a job that I can program a computer to do, I'm going to replace your job with an intelligent machine. Suddenly we are in a world where education, it was always a nice thing to have, has now become critical to a person's ability to earn enough money to support a family. And the public understands that. We asked this question last year. For a person to be successful in today's world, is it necessary to get an education beyond high school, or are there many ways to succeed with no more than a high school diploma? 75% of Houstonians recognize you've got to get education beyond high school. I tell people that the most important institution of higher education in Harris County is not Rice University, wonderful and important as Rice is, it's the community college system. That's where we take kids coming out of high school with no skills and connect them to the technical jobs of the 21st century. We are watching a world of growing inequality, and it is the central political challenge of our time. How do we restore the equalizing institutions that used to ensure that most Americans could share in the prosperity of the country? And increasingly today, that means access to quality education. Here's just a quick reminder of these 33 years. How would you rate job opportunities in Houston? Excellent, good, fair, or poor. First survey in 1982, 71% were saying excellent or good. Collapse of the oil boom down to 36%. There was a slight recovery in 1984. The saying in Houston was, stay alive till 85. Just a slight adaptation of the oil business. Not to worry, boomtown Houston will boom again as it always has throughout all of its history, and then the real hit. The falling price of Texas oil kept falling, fell below $10 a barrel in late 1986. 1 out of every 7 jobs that had been in Houston in 1982 disappeared by 1987. It was the worst regional recession of any part of the country at any time since World War II, in a city that had known nothing but economic boom from its beginnings, until the fateful date of May 1982, when the world that Houston inhabited changed forever. And then recovery, and by 1990, Houston recovered the jobs, lost in 82 and 87, now locked into the national economy. That economy went into recession in the beginning of the 90s, and then the longest peacetime economic expansion in American history. By 1998 and 2000, 66 and 68% were saying job opportunities are excellent or good. No different than the height of the boom back in 1982, recovery into a radically different economy. And then the recession of 2000, the jobless recovery that followed, then a recovery again, and then the last few years down into the deep recession, down to only 35% in 2010, 2011, and then a jump to 48% from last year, from 2011 to 2012, and a jump to 58% last year. Houston looks like it's doing great, right? Forbes magazine named Houston the coolest city in America, and they did that in July of last year. Here are the official unemployment rates in Harris County, Texas, in February of each of the years of the surveys. And you can see the upheavals. There was a worst of the recession at 10.1% unemployment in 1987, another peak just before the great expansion of the 90s, and then in the last few years, 4.3% only in 2008, jumping to 8.6% at the depths of the current recession in 2010, and then dropping to 8.4 to 7.3 to 6.8. Houston is a full percentage point below the average unemployment in the country as a whole. We are the jobs machine. We have reasons to feel enormously proud of how well we're doing. When you ask people in the privacy of their homes, how are you doing? You get a somewhat different picture. And here's just very quickly a reminder of these inequalities. This is how you've been doing financially over the last couple of years. Things have been getting better, about the same or worse. The percent saying I've been doing better jumps from 21% at the depths of the recession to 28% saying I'm doing better. And then with a full 1.5 drop in the overall unemployment rate, no improvement in the percent of people in their own homes saying I've been doing better financially over the last couple of years. And how do you think you'll be doing in the future? Next couple of years, more pessimism even than before. One of the powerful examples of this inequality of this new reality is that in our survey last year, we asked people with children at home, did you have any, how much difficulty, if at all, did you have paying for the groceries to feed your family during the past year? And 24%, one of every 4 respondents said they had difficulty buying the groceries to feed their family. The classic example of the inequalities in Houston. Houston has the greatest medical complex in the world, in the Texas Medical Center. And Houston has the highest percentage of children without health insurance of any major city in America. Central political challenge for all of us is right there in that growing inequality that needs to be addressed in important ways if we're going to build a viable society in the 21st century. So that's theme number 1. Why aren't I moving here? Theme number 2 is quality of place. And it's especially interesting in Houston because we never cared about quality of place. As I mentioned, who cares if it's ugly? Who cares if it's hot? Come on down, this is where the jobs are. Suddenly we're realizing that the resource of the knowledge economy is housed between the ears of the best and the brightest people in America who can live anywhere. And the source of wealth for Houston in the 21st century is going to have less and less to do with our location in the East Texas oil fields that counted for everything in Houston's prosperity in the 20th century, and more to do with biotech, nanotech, bio-nano infotech, bio-nano info envirotech, attracting the people working at the cutting edge of knowledge, able to put that knowledge into commercial ventures. As I say, the resource of the knowledge economy is housed between the ears of the best and the brightest people in America who can choose where they want to live. And quality of life issues have suddenly become central. Are we, and it's just what we were hearing before, Mitchell was saying, are we building a city that can attract people who can live anywhere to say, I want to live in Houston, Texas. And when you ask people in Houston, how do you feel about this city? You get a really striking picture. Compared to most other metropolitan areas in the country, would you say the Houston area is a much better place, a slightly better place, a slightly worse place, or a much worse place in which to live? Percent saying it's a better place to live jumps from 78, which was already pretty high, we thought, to 90% in the survey last year. The story is that people, most of us came to Houston reluctantly. Job was here, all right, we'll go for a couple of years, and then discover this is actually a wonderful place to live with extraordinary, unexpected quality of life in a whole range of different ways, all these amenities. Our problem is that people who don't live in Houston still today say, yuck, why would you want to live in Houston? And if Houston is going to succeed in the 21st century, it's got to change that perception. It's got to turn out to be a place where people who can live anywhere will say, I want to live in Houston, Texas. And it's fascinating to watch the public, the national press beginning to pay very nice, positive attention to Houston, which we never saw before, in the extraordinary diversity in the arts in Houston. Houston is one of the few places that has world-class symphony and ballet and opera, and suddenly people are beginning to recognize that this is, in fact, a city that is positioning itself for success in the 21st century. And one of the critical things tied into land use is this fundamental reality that we were touching on. I want to focus. The city of Houston covers 600 square miles and contains a grand total of 2 million people. You know how big 600 square miles is? You could put inside the city limits of Houston, Texas, simultaneously, I kid you not, the cities of Chicago, Baltimore, Philadelphia, Detroit, Philadelphia. Those 4 cities covering, with a total of 5.5 million people, cover the same geographical space as the city of Houston. And the greater Houston metropolitan area, the 10-county area, there's, of course, Fort Bend down to in the southwest, covers 10,000 square miles. Do you know how big that is? That is almost as big as the entire state of Massachusetts, and it is considerably larger than the state of New Jersey. This is the blob that ate East Texas. Houston was built on a crummy little bayou, 50 miles from any natural barrier in any direction, no mountains, no forests, no real rivers, little crummy bayous. A city built by, for, and on behalf of the automobile, made possible by air conditioning, and we spread everywhere. And we made a world that is totally dependent on the automobile. And that made a lot of sense in the old days. It makes, as we've all been hearing, much less and less sense today. And when we ask people, how would you like to live? If you could choose where to live in Houston, what would you prefer? If you could choose what kind of housing, a single-family house with a big yard where you would need to drive almost everywhere you want to go, or a smaller home in a more urbanized area within walking distance of shops and workplaces. We first asked that question in 2008. 59% said, thank you, I want that big house with a yard, even if I have to drive, but 36%, we're trying to figure out how many people in Houston have that option today of living within walking distance of shops and workplaces. And we thought maybe about 7%, 36%. And then we came back 2 years later to ask it again, and it was 39%. And then 2 years after that, 51%. Half of all the adults in all of Harris County, in this most automobile-dependent city, are saying, give me an alternative. Give me a choice. Give me some other way to live than the way that we've created up until now. And we found a very similar pattern when we asked about what kind of neighborhood, a single-family residential area or an area with a mix of developments, including homes, shops, and restaurants. And here there is what sociologists like to call a robust finding. Every year we ask it 50-50 split. But 50%, half of all the people in Harris County, the most automobile-dependent city in the world, are saying, I want this alternative. And it ties into a lot of things that Mitchell was saying. We are a different folk. We all went out to the suburbs in the 60s and 70s when 2/3 of all American households had children living at home. Today, less than 1/3 of all households have any children at home at all. Enormous numbers of us are empty nesters. The kids have grown up. I'm in my late 40s, early 50s. I love the symphony and the opera. I work downtown. Do I still want to have to commute for 2 hours every day? Do I still want to have to mow the lawn? Give me a choice. And all the young creatives, what sociologists call the postponing generation, in no hurry to get married and to have children to turn us into grandparents. They are just out, and they don't want to live out in the suburbs. And as Mitchell was saying, almost as many now, 20% today, they think within 10 years, more people will be living alone in single person households than are living with children. A whole new world. And this is exactly the moment to start rethinking, how do we respond to these new realities? How do we reinvent ourselves for the world of the 21st century? And here's another example of what has been happening. This is downtown Houston, east of Main Street, in 1978. Why did people leave downtown Houston, go out to the suburbs as fast as they could? That's what we were offering. And this is exactly the same picture 33 years later. Right? I don't know how many of you recognize all this. Of course, this wonderful Discovery Green Park, that's the kind of meeting place for people. That's the George R. Brown Convention Center, the state-of-the-art sports venue. Suddenly, there's a downtown. We are watching a city reinvent itself for the 21st century. And it's very much the challenge that all of our different places have. And Sugar Land has been pioneering new urbanism, right, and where we are right now. I mean, that whole sense that you can have an urban experience and urban opportunities even within what looks to the outside as just pure suburbia. No, it's now a community. It's a town. It's a place where people come together. It's a place that has an urban feel. And that's going to be a big part of the challenge as we all go forward into the 21st century is how to reinvent these cities. And you see, Houston, I think, is a city that is self-consciously in the process of rethinking what is it going to be in the 21st century. And I tell people, well, boy, if that's all that was happening, that would be enough to keep sociologists like me sort of enthralled by a 19th century business-oriented city committed above all else to economic prosperity, rolling up its sleeves and saying, okay, what do we need to do to position this city for success in the 21st century? But at this very same moment has come this fundamental, irreversible transformation in the ethnic composition of the Houston, the Texas, and the American population. And I want to just remind us very quickly of what happened here. The big story is that between this is the number of immigrants coming to America in each of the decades from the 1820s into the 2000s, 2100s. The big story is that between 1492 and 1965, 82% of all the human beings on the face of this earth who came to American shores, 82% came from Europe. Another 12% were Africans originally brought here as slaves to serve the Europeans. And there was a handful of Chinese and Japanese working as farmers and laborers in California and Hawaii. This nation, throughout all of its history, was an amalgam of European nationalities. And we were operating under the last 40 years of that period, starting in 1924, under a truly viciously racist law that tried to freeze the ethnic composition of America to have only Northern Europeans come. And we didn't like all these Southern and Eastern Europeans that were pouring in here between 1890 and 1914. And we passed this law to give major preference to Northern Europeans. Immigration plummeted. This is the Great Recession in 1930s. We really want to stop immigration, engineer Great Depression. Get 28% unemployment, people stopped coming. But virtually no immigration for 50 years. And we had basically assumed immigration was over. The law, the 1924 National Origins Quota Act could not survive the shifts of consciousness with the civil rights movements, with our competition with the Soviet Union for the hearts and minds of the third world countries, and Kennedy's assassination. Kennedy was a great champion. Wrote a wonderful book called Immigrant America, saying we've got to change this law. And after his death, the law was changed. And we thought nothing would change. We just said we're going to get rid of this. But immigration was a thing in the past, and we're going to give preference to people who are related to that, those who are already here. And then it added another provision that said, well, if you're a professional of exceptional ability, or if you have skills that are demonstrably needed in short supply, you can come to the head of the line if any new immigration occurs. And the Congress in its debates was saying we need to open the door for some more British doctors, some more German engineers. It never occurred to anyone that there were going to be African doctors, Indian engineers, Chinese computer programmers who would be able for the first time in the 20th century to come to America. The world changed. In the 1960s, about 3.5 million immigrants came to this country. Only 18% were from Europe. In the 1970s, about 5 million came. Only 18% were Europeans. In the 1980s and 90s and 2000s, about 10 million a year. 88% of all the new immigration coming to this country since the law was changed in 1965 is coming from Asia, Latin America, Africa, and the Caribbean. In the United States, that throughout all of our history had been an amalgam of European nationalities, is becoming a microcosm of the world. The first nation in history that can say we are a free people and we come from everywhere. And it's a remarkable change. Having the same moment as the American economy is becoming fully integrated in a single global world economic system, America, microcosm of the world, is not happening at the same rate everywhere. Two cities, Los Angeles and New York, are the big immigration capitals, followed by lesser magnet gateway cities, Miami, San Francisco, Chicago, Houston, followed right after Houston by Washington, D.C., Dallas, San Diego, and now spreading to every city and town across America. No city has been transformed as fully, as completely, as suddenly, as irreversibly as Houston, Texas. The basic story of Houston, here's the demographics. In the years of the oil boom, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, it was Anglos pouring into this area because this is where the jobs were, while the rest of the country, especially in the 70s, was having its Carter malaise, its stagflating 70s. We were booming, and by 1980, Houston became the 4th largest city in America. Still an overwhelmingly Anglo city, 63% Anglo, 20% African American, 16% Hispanic, 2% Asian. We were, for all of our history, a biracial southern city, dominated and controlled by white men, now becoming the single most ethnically diverse city in the country. There was our biracial world in 1960, right, when 74% of us were Anglos, 20% African Americans, just 6% Hispanics, and here is the last 3 decades. Anglo population has dropped. In Harris County, it's increased in the surrounding counties slightly. It's dropped slightly in Harris County, but surging growth of Latinos and Asians, steady growth of African Americans at about the same rate as the population as a whole, fueled by African immigration, fueled by the remarkable new return of middle-class African Americans from northern cities to southern cities, Atlanta first, Houston second. But today, Harris County is 33% Anglo, 41% Latino, 8% Asian, and 18% African American. And the single most ethnically diverse county in the world, we think, is Fort Bend County. Here is Fort Bend County. There we were back in 1990, and today, Fort Bend County, with 500,000 people, a little more than 500,000 people, is 19% Asian, as we were seeing, right? 24% Latino, 21% African American, 36% Anglo. That's as close as you can get to 1/4, 1/4, 1/4, 1/4. There are very few Asians in Miami. There are very few Hispanics in San Francisco. There are very few African Americans in Los Angeles. This is where the 4 communities meet. In greater balance, greater equality, all of us minorities, all of us called on to build something new under the sun, a truly successful, inclusive, equitable, multi-ethnic society that will be Houston and Texas and America in the 21st century. Happening here. No one chose this. No one planned to have this happen. This is Houston's destiny, to be at the forefront of the demographic transformation that's occurring across all of America. And here is the least ethnically diverse of the major counties, Montgomery County, was 81% Anglo in 2000, added a bunch of Anglos, and is now only 71% Anglo. So the transformations occurring everywhere, nowhere more sharply seen than in Fort Bend and Harris counties. And it's not just numbers, it's also ages. There are babies at the left and old folks at the right. And here, much to my chagrin, is where the Anglos are. This is again in Harris County. It's not until you reach people over the age of 60 that you find a majority of the population of Harris County is Anglo. And at each younger age group, Anglos, the percentage of Anglos plummets and is disproportionately non-Anglo. And in Harris County, especially, of everybody under the age of 20, in all of Harris County, right? This generation Z, is that? These are youngest, right? Who will be the future of Houston. And of everybody under the age of 20 in Harris County, 51% are Latino kids, 19% are African American, 9% are Asian, 22% are Anglos. So there are two basic statements you can make with absolute confidence. Number one, 70% of all the children under the age of 20 across all of Harris County are African American and Latino. The two groups overwhelmingly the most likely to be living in poverty. We know what poverty does to your ability to succeed in the public schools. And it is a safe statement to make that if Houston's African American and Latino young people are unprepared to succeed in the knowledge economy of the 21st century, it is hard to envision a prosperous future for Houston. That is who we are and will be in the 21st century. And I tell people, this is a done deal. Close the borders. Build your fence. Not another immigrant ever again will be allowed to come to these shores. It's not going to change. 60-year-old Anglos are not going to be making a whole lot more babies. I tell everybody, we'll do the best we can. We'll keep trying every chance we get. You can go to the bank on this, right? No force in the world is going to stop Houston or Texas or America from becoming more Latino, more African American, more Asian, and less Anglo as the 21st century unfolds. Nothing in the world can stop that. So the only question that our generation has been given is, okay, how do we make this work? How do we ensure that this ethnic diversity turns out to be the tremendous asset that it can be as we position ourselves in the global economy, the gateway to the global marketplace, and make sure it doesn't end up tearing us apart and becoming a major liability, reducing rather than enhancing our competitiveness in the global economy. And then I just want to show you very quickly, this is Harris County today. This is Texas today, but very close to us. Texas and California, the two greatest states in the Union, both of which are overwhelmingly majority minority states now. This is the United States today, still overwhelmingly Anglo. It's not until you reach kids under the age of 5 that you get a 50-50 split between Anglos and non-Anglos. But then because of those damn actuarial tables, the census says, here's what you're going to look like, America as a whole, in 2050. And it's basically Houston today. So it is a fair statement to make that how we navigate this transition will have enormous significance, not just for the Houston future, but for the American future. This is where the American future is going to be worked out. We are where all of America will be within the next 15 to 25 years. And here we are now. So it's, I think, what makes this moment and this time to be thinking about how do we position Sugar Land in this new world particularly relevant and important, because this is where people are going to look to say, this is what America can be in the 21st century as this transformation plays itself out. And the big differences in education. Asian immigrants are coming here with higher levels of education and economic backgrounds than we have ever seen in the history of immigration to America. This is less than high school degree, some college degree, postgraduate education. 59% of all Asian immigrants come with college degrees. Compared to just 37% of US-born Anglos, right? And Asians and Africans are coming with these extraordinary credentials because when the law was changed in 1965, family reunification was the key to getting here legally, and there was no one for any Asian or African to family reunify with because they had been banned for the entire 20th century from coming to this country until the law was changed in 1965. So the only way you could get here was to qualify as a professional of exceptional ability, as in the case of Indian doctors and African engineers, or as in the case of the Filipino nurses, having skills that were demonstrably needed in short supply, or as in the case of the Vietnamese qualifying for refugee status. One group of immigrants coming with extraordinary credentials, another group, largely Latino, coming with extraordinary, stunning educational deficits. And the great, great challenge is these are extraordinary people coming here with tremendous energy, great good health. People talk about the Hispanic paradox at the School of Public Health in UT in downtown Houston. The Hispanic paradox. Hispanic women living in abject poverty, coming into the hospitals and giving birth to perfect babies. 100% full-term, full-weight babies, whereas African-American mothers in similar circumstances have large numbers of low birth weight babies with serious problems. How come? What is it, this paradox? How is that possible? Who braves the journey? Who undertakes the tremendous challenge of coming here against all the obstacles we put in the way of immigrants? Only the healthiest, only the most ambitious, only the most self-confident, only the most committed to hard work and the belief that if they work hard, they can succeed. And you can see that dynamic among Hispanic immigrants. If I had more time, I could show you some of the evidence of what, looking at Hispanic immigrants in Houston who've been here for 9 years or less compared to 10 or 20 years, and you can watch this remarkable, these are remarkable people, but with serious educational deficits that we have got to make sure that we can address. Attitudes toward immigration have gone up in our surveys every year on almost every question. Houston has been a city of immigrants for 30 years now. We've had enormous opportunities to recognize how much those immigrants bring to the communities into which they move. The fear of immigration, the sense of being overwhelmed by new immigrants, peaked in 2007. And every year since then, fewer immigrants have come to this country. The Pew Research Center announced last year, for the first time in 35 years, all of their estimates tell them more Mexicans left the United States to go to Mexico than left Mexico to come to America. So that sense of being overwhelmed, that sense of all these immigrants coming to our country, are much less than today. And you can see this increasingly. I'm sure we have more the same number of legal immigrants in the next 10 years than the last 10. Are you in favor, opposed to granting a path to legal citizenship for illegal immigrants who speak English and have no criminal record? It goes up to 83% in our latest survey. Do you think the new immigration to America today mostly strengthens American culture or mostly threatens American culture? Strengthens American culture is also higher than it's ever been. And the single most powerful predictor among Anglos of comfort with diversity, of support for all of these changes, not surprisingly, is age. Younger Anglo, and here's just one quick, this is a kind of a fun thing that shows. We asked Anglos, have you ever been involved in a romantic relationship with someone who was not Anglo? And of Anglos under 50, 57, 49% say, thank you for asking. Yes, indeed, I have. And then among older Anglos, it drops from 42 to 25 to 10% among Anglos over 70. And it's a powerful reminder that we older Anglos grew up in a different world. The world of the 60s and 70s was a different reality than the world of the 1990s and 2000s. And there's a law of human nature that says what I am familiar with feels right and natural. What I'm unfamiliar with feels unnatural and somehow not quite right. And as I say, every question we've asked shows this pattern with age among Anglos. Of Anglos under the age of 30, 71% said that the increasing ethnic diversity in Houston brought about by immigration is a good thing for the city, and 50% of Anglos over 60 said it's a bad thing for the city. Granting illegal immigrants a path to legal citizenship, you think the increasing immigration to America today mostly strengthens American culture. 68% of Anglos under 30 say mostly strengthens American culture, and 65% of Anglos over 60 say it threatens American culture. Not surprising. That's what it means to live in a time of radical, revolutionary, dramatic change. It's a great challenge for older Anglos. I tell people you've got to be gentle with Anglos. This is a big change. But there's a sense of increasing recognition that this is, maybe we wouldn't have chosen this, but this is now who we are. And this is what it means, what Sugar Land represents and what Houston represents in the 21st century. And so the great challenges we touched on is there's going to be another 1 million people, we think, moving into Harris County in the next 20 years, another 3.5 million moving into the greater Houston metropolitan area. As we've heard, Sugar Land is going to grow enormously. How do we manage that growth? And who can doubt that if we continue to insist that everybody who comes here has to drive everywhere they want to go, who can doubt that the remaining green spaces will be turned into parking lots and subdivisions? Traffic, already bad, is going to get worse and worse. Pollution will worsen, and with it, the quality of life and the opportunities for this region to be successful in attracting the talent of the 21st century. So this is a moment when we know this is coming, and when it's time now to start, as we were talking about, to plan for how do we manage this growth in a way that creates a more beautiful, a greener, a healthier community when it has another, as in Harris County's case, another 1 million people over the next 20 years. And then, of course, tied in, and that's the new economy, that's quality of place. New economy, obviously, if we don't figure out how to get a hold of education. People ask me every once in a while, if you could do only one thing, Klienberg, that would change the trajectory of Houston for the future, what would it be? And I always said there are thousands of things to do. And in fact, everywhere you look, there are people working on different aspects of the city and making progress, and not enough yet. But now I have an answer. I would figure out a way to ensure that every single child in the greater Houston metropolitan area, every single one gets access to quality preschool education. between the ages of 2 and 6, when their brain is growing by 80%. When at age 2, rich kids and poor kids are just about the same. By age 6, rich kids are 1.5 to 2 years ahead of poor kids. Poor kids never catch up and never have a chance. And all the studies show investing in preschool education pays back in return on investment to a greater extent than at any other point in people's lives. We've got to figure out a way to do that. That's clearly one of the big answers to building. And I tell people, that investing in preschool education is as critical an infrastructure investment in the economic prosperity of this region in the 21st century as dredging the ship channel was for the economic prosperity of Houston in the 20th century. It is the resource that, on which wealth will be built is knowledge. And that's the critical challenge as we go forward, and then navigating this remarkable demographic revolution. So, wow, a lot of things on the plate, an enormously important and interesting time to be addressing these issues. Let me end this with that wonderfully insightful way that the Chinese language renders the word for crisis. The word for crisis in Chinese consists of 2 characters, wei ji. One character signifies danger, the other opportunity. Not a bad way to think about this remarkable coming together of forces, a set of cards that this generation has been dealt. No one planned for the oil boom to collapse, for Houston to go into major recession, and then recover into this radically different kind of economy where education has become so critical, where quality of life issues are now the pro-growth agenda for this region in the 21st century. No one planned that. No one planned for this demographic, ethnic revolution to occur. Here it is. These are the cards that this generation has been dealt. How we play those cards, with what kind of wisdom, sensitivity, determination to seize the opportunities and derail the dangers will be the measure of the kind of city, the kind of state, the kind of country that we build together in the 21st century. Thank you. Thank you all very, very much.
Okay, I'd like to ask Dr. Klienberg to take a seat, and Mitchell will come up here. All of you have these cards, and we want questions, so there will be city staff members circulating to collect questions. And we have also received some very interesting questions on Twitter and Facebook already. One thing that I want to note in terms of questions is we got a number of questions sort of asking specifically what does the city of Sugar Land intend to do? And I don't think either of our guests here are best equipped to answer that unless I replace it with the name of, say, Raleigh, in which case it's probably a less interesting answer to the question. But the good thing is through this forum series, we'll have a lot of other chances to ask those questions. So all of the questions we got, we're going to hang on to. And you'll hear a lot of those questions actually asked later. So bring your questions on up, and let's see what our guests have to say to them.
Oh, I better get my glasses.
What?
Are you going to read them?
I am going to read them.
Okay.
So I want to start with a general question. You look at the city of Sugar Land today, and it is successful by every measure you could think of. It is successful in terms of housing prices are going up. It is successful in terms of businesses are relocating here. You have a financially stable city with a strong tax base that is renewing its infrastructure. And I could look at that and say, why is there a need for change? Why not just keep doing what the city has been doing?
I'm going to go to my consulting days because I found that my most difficult clients are the ones that thought that everything's fine and we don't have to do anything. My easiest clients are those that either were on hitting rock bottom or close to rock bottom because they felt the need to reinvent themselves and change. But those that is kind of a fool's goal where they believe everything's fine, it'll always be that way, you always have to keep working on doing better and being better, otherwise you slowly start to slip. And some trends, whether it's demographic or other trends, will start to hit you and catch you off guard. So you always have to be looking for change and how to prepare for it. If not, I think it can catch you off guard. So, plus times change. Things change. A lot of people got caught off guard when people started working at home versus commuting to work and started to change development patterns, how people commuted. So, for me, I think it's very important that you always are looking for what is coming so you can be prepared for it. So that way you can ensure you're taking care of both present and future generations.
Yeah, and you want to look beneath the surface. as I mentioned, one of the things that's striking is the data look fantastic until you ask people in these kinds of surveys, how are you doing financially? And you discover a whole bunch of people are not doing better. And so things that look great at macro levels and first impression. So, and I think that you find that in Sugar Land as you do in Harris County, that there are lots of underlying problems that need to be addressed, and the longer we wait to address them, the harder they become to solve as we move forward. But above all, it's this recognition that it's a different world out there, and what's coming is different from what we've seen.
So both of you talked a lot about generations and the change in generational attitudes, but you also talked about the change in ethnic diversity. How do you think that second change changes people's preferences on what kind of places they want to live? How does that impact land use?
I personally don't think, I think it's more socioeconomic than it is racial. I think people all want good quality school for their kids that crosses all, in my opinion, racial groups, socioeconomic groups. Everybody wants good schools for their kids. So from my perspective, other than having some of the, I should say, traditional cultural foods that you want to have nearby or places of worship that are common to your culture, aside from that, I think most people still want quality neighborhoods, quality schools, they share similar values. But I don't think the other races assume that people feel the way they feel. They think there are probably more starker differences than there are. So from that perspective, I don't see as significant change. I just think it's a misunderstanding between the different racial groups.
Yeah, I think that's right. It has to do with socioeconomic status, has to do with life circumstances,
Right.
has to do with if you grew up in the suburbs, you're more likely to want to be in the city and vice versa. But I tell people, the greatest challenge for the future of America is not a racial divide or an ethnic divide. We are falling in love with each other, marrying, making multiracial babies, and the greatest challenge for the future of America is a class divide. And that's happening in every single ethnic community. The African American community has a growing middle class and a growing underclass simultaneously. It's a class divide predicated above all else on access to quality education. The single most critical issue is there, I think, as we go forward.
Both of you actually talked about sort of different forms of neighborhoods, higher density neighborhoods, more mixed use neighborhoods. And I think a very common perception is this idea that more urban places, more mixed use places, denser places have higher rates of crime. So I'd be interested in hearing both of your takes on that perception.
Well, first, it's not true. I mean, I remember when I was working in New York City, and we wanted to publish a study, which nobody wanted me to do it, and saying that you were safer in Harlem than you were in the Upper East Side, and people just found that mind-boggling and just said, no, this cannot be. But it was true. I'm sorry, your car is safer in Harlem than it is in the Upper East Side. I think, again, that's just based on perception and orientation of what urban areas meant to people. There are many high-density places that are very affluent, that are or middle class and have very low crime. So unfortunately, the media and stories and just years of perception drives that in, that renting is dangerous, it drops property values, it is more people, and more people means more crime. So that's just something where there are many, many places people can look to show that it's not the case. Unfortunately, people latch onto the bad examples, and because their properties are affected, will latch onto the worst case scenarios to reinforce their concerns. So, like I said, there are many places you can find throughout the country, our city, even in this region, where there are quality, like right next to City Hall, I noticed there is a great high-density project right next door. I don't think if that's a center of crime. It seems like a very high-quality, high-end project. So it's just something where people really have to put their perceptions in check and be open to see other examples where urban can be good and urban can be safe.
What they call good density.
Good density, yes.
And of course, the reality is that it used to be the case, that there was serious crime in the inner city, which was one of the factors that pushed people out. But that's the past and not the big challenge is what the Wall Street Journal once said, is that we all want to live in communities made up of PLUs, people like us. And we are uncomfortable in a place where a lot of people much richer than me, a lot of people much poorer than me. We want to live and that's a big impulse for going out to the suburbs. And I think part of what the challenge is build communities where people are comfortable, indeed relish diversity, relish the fact that not everybody is going to look like me or have the same proclivities as me or have the same income as me.
Right.
But that creates a kind of a much more interesting world to explore. And that's where a lot of young people are saying, I want an urban experience because I want that diversity.
I wanted to make one recommendation, but because of time I couldn't do it. I honestly believe there needs to be some breakout session on the topic of apartments and multifamily. Because this community, I think, needs a therapy session to have it, get it out their system, talk about it, because I can tell there are deep-rooted concerns from probably examples on other places that if people did a thought bubble of what apartments and urban mean, it'd be interesting to fill in that blank. And I think we have to talk about it, because as I did during my presentation, I asked who in this room ever rented, and most of the people raised their hand. Now, unless all of you are thugs, criminals, or something really, really bad, I think that is when we think of other people being renters, the lens come off, and we perceive people very differently. But if you look at the choices going forward, the younger generation, they do not want to own a home. They want to rent. They don't want to buy. There's changes coming, and so sooner or later, this community can say we don't want to deal with it and be hit with that change, or take it head on and have a conversation, whether you call it good density, put in design regulations, what can you put in place to address some of the discomfort. But just to say, no, we don't want it because we're afraid of everything and we're not going to take a chance, we'll be the door into our schools and our neighborhood. There has to be this therapy session to talk about what is going on, because that is inevitable headed toward your future. So that's something I would strongly suggest during this land use forum, that the one set-aside session where people come and talk about their concerns, their fears, their joy, their aspirations about multifamily and apartments.
And that is actually on the agenda for one of the later forums. So
Good job.
that will happen.
I may come back for that one. Woo.
And by a talented therapist.
Yes.
And I actually just got a question that actually follows up on that. Somebody says Houston is just a few miles away, and there are a lot of apartment units available in Houston. And speaking to the idea of different parts of the region playing different roles and different parts of the region competing with each other, why shouldn't Sugar Land just say we are going to be the single-family city and let Houston be the apartment city?
You can. And there are many places that do that. When you make that decision, you have to recognize, as I said in my presentation, the consequences that come along with it. And there are some signs that you have to watch out for. The family sizes that are changing. There are a lot of communities that are wondering, if we stay single-family and we retire and want to sell our home and move somewhere else, who are we going to sell it to when there's more of a market of single individuals? If you want to attract young professionals to work in your community and live, if there are no choices for them to buy, do they want to come to this community and live here? So you can certainly take that option, but recognize that as time moves on and the single-family households shrink smaller and smaller, the question is, what will be the future of that community? You can kick that decision down the road. That is your choice, but sooner or later, this community is going to have to deal with it. But certainly there are many communities that choose Cary, North Carolina, right next door to us. They say, we don't want that density, go to Raleigh. And a lot of the young people are leaving saying, I'm not coming back to Cary. I have no reason to come back. I'm not returning. And so I'm sure some of you have the same conversations with your children that, look, I like being raised in Sugar Land, but in terms of where I prefer to live, I'm not coming back. So the question is, who will repopulate Sugar Land going forward? That is a question that you're going to have to deal with during this land use forum.
Both of you talked about education levels, and some of the numbers we saw were quite stark. So what does this disparity in education level, especially around changing demographics, mean for sort of the future productivity of a region like Houston and for the economic base?
Well, I actually took it out of my presentation, so I'm glad you kept it in. My biggest concern, if we truly are patriotic Americans and we want to be competitive in the 21st century, I know what we have to do to ensure we educate the new innovators, the doctors, the leaders, which right now, by 2050, 62% are going to be minority. I'm concerned if we don't realize, if we truly care about this country to be competitive in a global economy, what we have to do. I'm concerned because right now, African Americans, Latinos have the lowest attainment rate of all children. So if we truly want to be competitive and have your region competitive, you have to, I agree, invest in education. Unfortunately, in this country, school and race are synonymous, and as something, as we change our as the demographics change, is something else that we're going to have to deal with head on. It's uncomfortable, but as you stated, and as I stated, it's a reality that we're going to have to deal with sooner or later.
And one of the things that one of my students did a study of Fort Bend County schools. And of course, we in Fort Bend are so proud of this ethnic diversity. The schools are not very ethnically diverse. Right? They are the Asians and Anglos are in some schools, African Americans, Latinos, and others. That's seen as a central challenge. And Fort Bend, more than anywhere else, has an opportunity to bring them on. All the studies show that when you put minority kids in with Anglo kids, the minority kids do better, and the Anglo kids do a little bit better themselves. And it's just crazy to keep that separation and to pay the long-term cost.
I didn't want to use a Raleigh example or Wake County. We're in Wake County. I'm going to use this example because it shocked a lot of people. We now merge as a county system. When you move to our community, you don't know what school you're going to go to. You don't know. And it was done because we didn't want people to buy a neighborhood or buy a school system. You lived in the county, and as a result, most of our schools are diverse. All schools are diverse, and as a result, most neighborhoods are diverse. And it's very controversial. There are people that try to overturn it again and again. We try to make sure they're balanced, but it's a very good approach. People want neighborhood schools, they don't have it, and so we take that out of the equation, and we're able to deal with the diversity in our community. I'm not suggesting you do that, but I'm saying these are some of the ways, at least in our community, we try to elevate the educational level by having a lot more diversity, by taking away the neighborhood school approach. That this is my school for my community, I'm going to buy a home just so I can have that school system. And in fact, we're considered one of the 6 best school districts in the United States. So it's working, and I think it's another model going forward of how you can address this whole issue of the changing demographics.
So this region is growing very fast, and everybody who drives on Highway 59 feels that growth every day.
Especially today.
So at some point, is there a reasonable limit? Is there a point where a city should say, this much growth is enough, that the resources we have can't support anymore?
Legally, with our Constitution, you cannot deny someone the right to develop their property. So unless we change our Constitution, it's not going to happen. We have to figure out a way of measuring that growth, look at alternative methods of transportation, or creating employment centers that are closer to where we live. The latter has been probably the strongest approach, what we call a polycentric approach, have more employment centers where you drive shorter distances to work or work out of your home. That is becoming more and more of the effective model. Rather than driving to a hub and spoke, everybody drives to Houston for a job. How do we start creating these more urban, livable places where people can go to work? But you can't stop growth. It's just not constitutional. So we have to figure out a way of working through this.
And let me just add to that, you cannot solve the transportation problems by just building more roads.
Correct.
Someone said that trying to do that is like dealing with your weight problem by buying a bigger pair of pants.
Right.
It doesn't work. So what we're hoping in Houston is we'll eventually have a world where everyone will have a car, but they won't have to have 3 cars in a household. That there will be alternatives for at least, so that as you start adding this another 3.5 million people to this region, that traffic does not get much worse. And it will get worse before it gets better, but that's a big part of why it makes sense to start thinking now about alternative opportunities.
So talking about the opposite of growth, I actually once met a planner from Michigan who said what we're doing here is not smart growth, it's dumb decline. And both of you actually touched on this idea of the Northeast in particular not growing or even shrinking, and people moving to this part of the country. So 2 questions. What are they running away from? Or why are they leaving? Or why is that not growing? And secondly, what lessons should we learn from that in planning for the future?
Let me just say, because I don't want to blow everybody's mind, because I do presentations about the next 50 years, and the trend may be reverse. It may happen, people are moving here primarily for the weather, for the lower cost of living, are probably the 2 primary factors. And in some cases, jobs, because a lot of businesses are moving to the south, and people are moving to them as well. So I think those are big factors. But there are some game changers that could affect us, and one is water. How water is affecting this country is going to change, because I took out a map to show you the places that are growing the fastest are also the places that are expected to have the most droughts in the 21st century, and water supply is going to be a big factor. Why do I say that? Well, guess what? The North has water that the South does not have. They're not in the place. So the South and the West are the places that are experiencing or will experience the most droughts. These happen to be places. So water will be the new oil, and the North has it, And you may see a reverse trend because it's not just for people living, but businesses need water to run their businesses as well. So that may change going to the future. But primarily, it's weather, and it's quality of living, and it's the jobs why people are moving to the south.
So what do we do to prevent Houston from being the next Detroit?
Oh, no. I think Detroit, you don't be one industry town, and theirs had a lot to do with race. And I think the equation has changed. We don't have the same factors. I think people have learned from the Detroits, but they were one company town. A lot more cities are now becoming more diverse in terms of their industries. You don't rely on one business, one company town. Those that have, Pittsburgh Steel, they've now changed to, they're now oil, and not oil, they're more gas, their technology. They've diversified their economy, and Houston's done the same. It's not just oil and gas, they have other businesses here in Houston.
Well, there's another key factor is immigration. If you see where the great attraction, where one of the cities are the magnets of growth, they are also the magnets of immigration. And the big story is Philadelphia, right? In 1981, Houston surpassed Philadelphia. They were basically the same size. Houston has just grown like gangbusters. Philadelphia has stagnated. And the main reason is that it has not been a magnet for the new immigration. Cities like Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, St. Louis, Detroit, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Buffalo are all cities losing population, largely because they've been unable to replace the aging whites with the young immigrants. And Houston has boomed largely because of immigration.
But in all fairness, Houston cheats. They annex a lot. So,
Not recently.
not recently. No, but there are places that annex and gain. But you're absolutely right that immigration is what really helped decline. There's very few northeast cities that gain population. One is Philadelphia, New York. There are very few. Columbus, Ohio, I don't get it, but you're one of the few. But almost all are losing population.
We'll close with one
It's cold up there. I'm from New York. Very cold.
Seasons.
You hear about that vortex?
One final question, and then we'll let everybody else have their say. Somebody asked about public transportation, and we are here in a city that has park and ride buses into Houston, but little other public transportation. And do you think the lack of public transportation, especially as demographics change and generational preferences change, can stunt a city's growth?
Well, if you were a larger city, I would say that light rail, streetcar is a must to be competitive and attract a certain demographic, absolutely. For a community like this, clearly looking at your aging population, that having either paratransit or other options is something to definitely look at. If you have a bunch of employment centers within your jurisdiction, it makes sense. But I think having those direct buses to the major employment centers for at least now makes sense. But I certainly would keep an eye on it and have conversations to find out in your aging population what options people have for mobility. Paratransit may be the easy answer, but I'm dead serious about the autonomous vehicles. If you don't know about it, this is probably going to, I know it's one of those space age things, but it's vehicles, if you don't know what it is, it's vehicles that drive themselves. And Google experimenting with it, they predict that there'll be more than half the cars on the road by 2030, 2040 will be autonomous vehicles, and that may address the aging issue, but still, I think you certainly should look at public transportation to the major employment centers, start taking a look at paratransit, but I just don't know if you're at the point right now, unless you want to have a light rail, but that's very expensive from here, it's 20 miles from here to Houston, that would cost billions and billions of dollars, and you wouldn't get a big enough return to have either a commuter rail or light rail from here to Houston.
The big problem is that most of the commutes go from one suburb to another rather than something.
Oh, well, it should go to deployment centers, yeah.
Houston is the epitome of what sociologists call the MCMR, the multi-centered metropolitan region.
Yeah.
We're no longer sitting in suburbs. There are 8 to 10 major activity centers larger than downtown San Diego that are all part of this metropolitan region. So it's the most spread out, most automobile dependent, the city least capable of handling transit. But as Christoph knows better than anyone, light rail downtown is beginning to make a difference. And in some places you can do it. But we don't have the density to support light rail, and you can't get density if you don't have something like light rail, because if you build a city by automobiles, by definition, they can't be dense.
Right.
So it's an interesting and major challenge. It's a city now, as I say, that has to reinvent itself and think about how do we begin to accommodate some of
But
these
certainly,
needs.
but certainly from a regional basis, I think commuter rail may be something this region wants to contemplate. There is no way that Sugar Land could do this on their own. I don't know what conversations are happening on a regional framework about commuter rail, but it's something that certainly, the difference between light rail and commuter rail has less stops. It probably travels maybe 3 miles before it comes to a stop. Light rail can be every half mile. It's a smaller train. It's lighter. It's usually electric. Commuter is more on diesel, and it's heavier. We call it heavy rail. And so those are the ones that could stop every few miles. And so I think you may come a point where commuter rail, where people go to one place, they park their car, and then they will take the commuter rail to major employment centers. But that's not something that Sugar Land can do on its own. Is that conversation happening, by the way? Please tell me it is.
It is.
All right, Houston. Okay.
Okay. Could everybody give our speakers a big hand? And now we actually want to hear from you in terms of what you think. We're going to do a group activity. Every one of you got one of these agendas, and you will notice your agenda has a number on it. The number on the agenda is the number of your group. And we have set up breakout sessions in the conference rooms over here. So get up, walk out those doors, and city staff will guide you to the proper room for your group.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. See, you feel enlightened now? Yes. Thank you. I'm working on a book, I'm on a contract, so
of our community. Our community is in continual change as it prepares to envelop growth. Throughout all my experiences that I've seen, there must be an effort extended